We're gonna make it look fly with some DIY. We're gonna make it look fly with some DIY. We're gonna make it look fly with some DIY. Uh-oh, thrift diving.
Hey, what's up? It's Serena Pia from thriftdiving.com, which is a do-it-yourself blog, YouTube channel, and podcast that helps you decorate, improve, and maintain your home with paint, power tools, and thrift stores without sacrificing your budget, the environment, or style. Welcome to episode 132 of the Thrift Diving Podcast. You know, it's a Tuesday. I don't normally publish a podcast on Tuesday, but I missed last week. And I missed this past weekend. And I was like, okay, we can't have 2 weeks in a row. So I am dropping this one on a Tuesday. And by this weekend, there will be another one. And I'd already gotten through like the first couple of minutes of talking about paint sprayers, which is what we're going to talk about today. And realized, wait, I should probably check to make sure everything sounds good. You know, when you're recording into a microphone, you assume that everything is just recording perfectly well. Well, guess what? I stopped and went back to listen, and my microphone was on mute. Now, imagine if I'd talked for 30 minutes and then found out that everything was lost. That would suck. Anyway, hi, everybody. Okay, I'm super excited about today's podcast. I know from the title, you're probably thinking, paint sprayers? That's not exciting, but I think it is exciting because if you are a DIYer, I can tell you that there are probably 3, 4, 5, 6 different painting projects that you're going to do in your house and around your home for 2024. And the question is you going to use a paintbrush or are you going to use a paint sprayer? And we're going to talk about a couple, not so much the brands, but which paint sprayer do you want to get? There's a couple different ones, and it really depends on the types of projects that you plan to do. That's going to dictate what kind of paint sprayer you get. Now, I think probably going further on this topic would be, okay, now let's evaluate 3 or 4 different brands to see how they stack up against each other. Haven't gotten there yet. I think, I should write that down. That's actually a great idea. At different price points and see which one works best. But in today's podcast, we're going to talk about the different types of paint sprayers and what are the applications that you might want to use them for, because that's going to dictate which one you buy. And of course, your budget is going to dictate which one you buy. And I've used a couple of these. In fact, I have. There's 3 types that we're going to talk about. One type we're not going to talk too much about. I don't know much about them. It's more on the professional side. Like if you are, let's say you are a professional cabinet maker, and of course you want the best finish possible for your products, for your clients, you're going to go to the probably one other type of brand than the other 2 or the other types. So we're going to stick with kind of the 2 types that if you're on Amazon, if you go to Home Depot or Lowe's, these are the 2 types that you're going to see. And you may be wondering, which one do I get? It's not just about price point. It's about what are the types of projects that you're going to want to do around your home in 2024 and which one is going to help you save time and get the better finish. So let's start there. I think when people think of using a paint sprayer, there are the 2 things that I've just mentioned that come to mind: saving time and getting a cleaner finish. And I'll tell you that when I was painting my kitchen cabinets, which thank God I just got that project done, it's on my YouTube channel. So if you have not seen it, go down below to the show notes. You can click directly to watch that video or go to the blog post. There is a blog post that's like almost 6,000 words. I mean, it's insanely long, but it has all the information that you would want to know on how to paint your kitchen cabinets white, especially if they're dark. So the first thing is saving time. When I painted my kitchen cabinets, it took a lot of, as I mentioned in the video, and I think I talked a little bit about this here on the podcast, it took so many coats. I'm not kidding you. It took probably about 7 coats of like product altogether, 3 coats of primer. I did probably 3 coats of Beyond Paint. I followed it up with 1 coat of top coat. I mean, that's like 7 coats. That's a lot of time. You can't get all that done in one day. So you're letting it dry in between. And if you're just going by hand, that's going to take a lot of time. I had 26 cabinets. So imagine painting 26 cabinets by hand. So when I gotten all of the cabinet boxes done in the kitchen, then I had moved to the shed. I laid out all 26 cabinets, and I didn't have enough space for all of that. So, part of that was, okay, I'm going to do these 10 cabinets. I've got, so much counter space in here. I've got tables set up. I'm going to do these 10, and then tomorrow I'll come back and flip them over. And then once those are done, I'll move those aside, then bring the other 10. So, it's when you're painting kitchen cabinets or just a large project, period, you need space in order to stretch everything out, right? So I had everything laid out here in the shed and everything was cleaned. I didn't think that I needed to sand the cabinet doors down. And I talk a little bit about that in the blog post. The reason why is because I was using a really good primer. It was called Extreme Bond Primer from Sherwin-Williams. And it says it's made specifically for people that don't want to sand. If you want to go over glass, plastic, concrete, like all of those surfaces, including wood, you can use this primer directly on without having to sand. So as I had these cabinets laid out, I'm skipping sanding and I pull out my paintbrush and I'm applying these coats of primer. And I'm looking around and I'm like, I've got so many coats that I'm going to have to do, like 3 coats front and back on 26 cabinets. And my mind was just blown. I didn't want to spend that time. And so I thought, wait a minute, I think I've got a paint sprayer here that I can use. So that's what I did. I pulled out my paint sprayer, and I'll talk to you in a minute about the 2 different kinds of paint sprayer. And let me tell you, I laid a tarp in my yard and some other plastic in my yard, and I sprayed those things like within a day. I was able to get all 26 cabinets primed with 2 coats, front and back. And the very next day, actually, I think it was the same day. Once they were dried, I was able to pull them into the shed and get them prepared for the final coat of Beyond Paint, which is, I was going to do 2 or 3 coats of that. And the amount of time that I saved by pulling out that paint sprayer was like a godsend. I mean, the excitement that escaped from me the minute I realized, oh my gosh, I'm going to be able to get through this part so quickly. Because by this point, I had already felt the stress of, oh my gosh, I'm painting these cabinet boxes in the kitchen. I think that I've got 1 or 2 coats. It looks good. And then I'm still seeing some of that dark wood coming through. And I was getting frustrated because not only was that taking a long time, but I had 26 cabinets that I was going to have to do. So using the paint sprayer for the primer really saved a lot of time. And so if you are somebody that is going to do a big project like that, whether it's cabinets, maybe you're going to be doing your dining room table and you've got 6 chairs with a lot of legs that have nooks and crannies, that's a lot to get through with a paintbrush. And so, in that situation, you might want to consider a paint sprayer. It just helps you to get the job done quickly, and not to mention you're going to get a cleaner finish. Brush strokes, as I mentioned, or I think I was telling you this back when I was recording and wasn't actually recording. Some people actually like the look of brush strokes. And I think if you're somebody that likes the shabby chic furniture look, brush strokes is kind of cool, right? You can do a lot with brush strokes and using some brown wax to accentuate those brush strokes. But if you're someone that likes a really clear, and when I say clear, I don't mean like in the color, but you don't like to see a lot of texture. You just like smooth, maybe it's a clear top coat surface and, maybe like a more modern look, then a paint sprayer might be the way that you want to go, because you're not going to get that texture from the brush strokes and from a roller. Now, I did use a roller on my cabinets. Beyond Paint actually recommends using a small little 1/4-inch nap roller, and it does leave texture. Now, the texture is not bad. It's a self-leveling paint, so you're not going to get a ton of texture, but it leaves some texture. It's not going to be completely smooth. But if you are somebody that likes a really smooth surface, then you're going to want to use a paint sprayer. But here's the question. What kind of paint sprayer would you use? Now, there's 3 different ones. The first one is called an HVLP, which is high volume, low pressure. And I'll go through what each of these, the characteristics of each of these and the applications. But that's the first one, HVLP. The second one is going to be an airless paint sprayer. And I've used this as well. You've seen me on my YouTube channel spraying my fence. Remember a couple years ago, I painted my fence this beautiful, like gorgeous blue color. Well, that was an airless paint sprayer. And we'll talk about why I used that paint sprayer versus the HVLP. And then there's a third one, which is, they actually call it, well, online you'll see AAA, AAA, but it's an air-assisted airless paint sprayer. So it's kind of like a combination of the two that I just mentioned. Now, I will tell you, we're not going to talk too much about that. I don't own one of those. Those are more for like commercial applications and can be a very expensive product. So like $800 to $5,000. Anybody listening to this podcast, we're not spending $5,000 on a paint sprayer. Like, unless you're a professional, you really don't need to go in that direction. So we're going to stick with the HVLP, high volume, low pressure, which is one that's using air in order to pump that paint out of the paint sprayer, and then one that's actually airless. And that's going to be using something like called a pressurized pump and piston. Do I understand the mechanics of it? No. But what we have to understand as DIYers are what are the applications that we would want to use each of these for, and which one do you want to buy? So let's start with the HVLP, the high volume, low pressure. So as I mentioned, this is a paint sprayer that actually has air that's coming from a compressor or a turbine that creates this really fine particle or droplet of the paint that's coming out of the nozzle. So it's atomizing this paint before it leaves the nozzle, and it's creating this really fine mist. So if you've ever seen videos, like DIY videos where people are using a paint sprayer, it comes out like spray paint. And it just looks amazing when it falls onto the furniture, which typically you would use it for precision work. So if you see someone painting a dresser, or maybe they're doing doors or cabinets, this is where you're going to have more control with the paint sprayer. You're not going to get a lot of overspray. Now, keep in mind, you are still going to get some overspray. And this is one thing that I don't like about using a paint sprayer. I've actually used one of these HVLP sprayers inside my house. And I did not actually put something over top of all the other furnishings or all the other things that were in the room. And it leaves this fine mist, like let's say whatever color you're using, let's say you're using white. There's this fine white mist. It's almost like, it looks like a powder, but it's actually attached to all the things in the room. So if you are using a paint sprayer inside, right, if you are doing your walls, you're going to want to make sure that you're putting plastic over everything. Because even though when you're doing research on this, they'll say, oh, it gives you a lot more control and you don't have as much overspray. But because you don't have as much overspray doesn't mean that there's no overspray. So you have to make sure that you are covering everything up. So let's say you're doing your kitchen, for example. You're probably going to, if you're going to use a paint sprayer for your cabinet boxes, then you're going to want to make sure everything in that kitchen is covered up, because that fine dust, well, I'm going to say dust. It's not a dust, but those fine particles will land on everything like a dust. And even though it's relatively easy to clean up, you don't want to clean all that stuff up. It's a nightmare. So it will create a lot of fine particles, but it's the fine particles that actually create the really smooth surface. So you need the fine particles. Just don't let it get everywhere. And one thing that's different about the HVLP paint sprayer is that you're actually holding the paint in a container that's attached to the paint sprayer. So if you look in the blog post, you'll actually see some pictures of the one that I used. It's by HomeRite. HomeRite was actually purchased by Wagner. So some of their products still have a HomeRite name to them. Some of them have switched over to Wagner. But you'll see that the paint sprayers, these HVLP sprayers, they actually are still available with HomeRite. And so you'll see it in the blog post. But you'll notice that there's a can or a plastic container that just screws onto the front of the paint sprayer. So that's where your paint is attached, and it has a straw that sucks it up into the paint sprayer, and then shoots it out. Now, one thing that's really cool about this is that you have more control over the flow and the thickness of the paint. But because it's such a small amount of paint that's coming out per minute, it is for smaller applications. So it's going to spray. I found some information online that said it sprays about 15 to 20 ounces of paint per minute. Now, if that sounds like a lot, wait until you see how much an airless paint sprayer will spray out. But this is going to give you a finer finish. You're going to have more control, and you can actually use it for paint, lacquers, varnish, and stains. Now, the stains, stains tend to be really like watery. Those, for the most part, are going to flow through pretty easily. But for paint, guess what? You're going to have to thin that paint with water. And here's the thing. There are some paints that do not want you to put too much water into it, because if you do, then it kind of destroys the nature of, or like the glues and the chemistry of the product. And I'll tell you an example here. So, I'm using Beyond Paint for my kitchen cabinets. It turned out great. I just told you a couple minutes ago that I used primer in the paint sprayer, the HVLP paint sprayer, and I was able to get it done pretty quickly. Here's the thing though, I had to add a lot of water because there's a viscosity cup, right? Now this actually comes with the paint sprayer. It's a little cup that once you add some water to the paint, you dip the little cup, it has a hole at the bottom of it. You dip the cup into your watered down paint and you lift it up and you count how many seconds it takes for that paint or that product to flow through that viscosity cup. And if it takes longer than, I believe it's 30 to 45 seconds, then you have to add water to your paint. And that primer that I was using, there was no way that primer was getting through that cup within 30 to 45 seconds. So it felt like I was adding a lot of water. I didn't count up how many ounces that I added, but it seemed like it was a lot. And I continued adding until I got to that viscosity of, I think I got to about 45 seconds. So it was thinned, but it was not too thin. It was in that window of time, that you need to get through that viscosity cup. But when I had reached out to Beyond Paint, I told them, I said, now I used this paint sprayer with the primer. Can I use this paint sprayer with Beyond Paint? And this is what they said. They said, yes, you can actually use this paint sprayer or any paint sprayer with Beyond Paint. But here's what they recommend. They recommend that you use the widest nozzle. And I don't think for the HVLPs, the one that I use, the HomeRite, I don't think it actually comes with different nozzles. I could be wrong, but that's something I'll have to check on. There's other paint sprayers like the airless paint sprayer that typically comes with maybe 2 or 3 nozzles, and you can order other nozzles too. But Beyond Paint had said to me, if you struggle with getting that paint through the widest nozzle, then you can add a little bit of paint. Now, if you've got a quart of paint, which is about 32 ounces, you're going to add about 2 ounces of water. Well, I can tell you 2 ounces is not a lot of water. So if you're adding water, and Beyond Paint actually suggests using distilled or deionized water or reverse osmosis water. That's what we have in our kitchen. We have a filter at our sink. This will eliminate any hard water issues. But once you add that 2 ounces and you stir it up and it still doesn't go through the paint sprayer very well, then you may not be able to use that HVLP sprayer, because here's what's going to happen. You're either going to have to do one of two things. You're going to have to add more water, right? So that paint flows easily through the paint sprayer. But if you add more water, Beyond Paint said that there's the resins, right? The glue that's in their paint. And the more water that you add, the more it's diluted. And then it could get to a point where there's just not enough glue or resin to hold the paint together. So it's not going to provide good adhesion to your cabinets or to whatever furniture you're painting. So that could possibly happen. Or if you try to get it through this paint sprayer and it's still too thick, you're going to have what's kind of known as orange peely texture to your project. And that's not the look you're going for, right? Like when you're using a paint sprayer, you want everything to be nice and smooth. But if the paint's too thick, it's going to come out with that orange peel look. And that's not the look you're going for. You're going to be like, that's not what I signed up for. So keep that in mind. Now, here's what you can do. If you find that you want to use paint and you don't want to have to add water to it. Now I should also point out, adding water to paint can change the color. Now, if you're doing white, that's not a big deal. But let's say you're using this gorgeous blue, and this is the specific blue that you want for your table, your chair, your cabinets. You add water, you might lighten that paint. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So let's say that you want to use a paint sprayer where you don't have to add any water. You just want to use it straight out of the can, straight out of the container. Well, in that case, you might want to consider an airless paint sprayer. Now, this is a little different because it uses a pressurized pump and piston. Don't ask me to explain how that works, but I can tell you that it's a little different because you're not going to be using air. You're going to be using like a pressurized pump. And with the HVLP, remember I told you that that paint or that product or the stain is actually held in the cup and it's sucked up through this tube or like a straw, and then it's, applied to your project. Well, this is a little different. You're actually probably putting a hose directly into the paint can or into, whatever product that it is that you're spraying. And most times you don't actually have to thin that paint. The only difference is that you're going to be spraying a lot of that paint, and it doesn't really make sense if you're using a very expensive paint. Furniture paints are $35, $40, sometimes $50 per quart. That's a lot of money. And so if you're using an airless paint sprayer where you're dipping a hose into that paint, it almost doesn't make sense, right? It's almost like trying to fill a cup with a fireman's hose. It's totally mismatched. And I feel like using an airless paint sprayer for a small job, like, let's say painting, your dining room table, that's not really it's a large piece of furniture, but it's not large enough where you'd want to stick a tube down into the quart of paint and then spray, because within probably 3 minutes, that quart of paint's gone. You know why? Because within 1 minute, actually, it will spray 1/2 gallon to 2 gallons per minute. So the airless paint sprayer is not something that you're going to use for small projects. You're going to use it for large flat surfaces like your walls, paint. Like let's say you're doing your vinyl siding, right? You want to change the color, or maybe you just want to freshen up the color of your house. And you're going to be painting 3,000 square feet of walls. Yeah, in that case, you're going to use an airless paint sprayer. You're probably going to get a 5-gallon bucket of exterior paint, and it makes sense. When I did my fence, I think it was probably 3 years ago, I should have bought a 5-gallon, but I actually had bought like 5 or 6 gallons of exterior fence paint, I think it was. And that airless paint sprayer, it chewed through those cans of paint. It seemed like one after the other, I was just changing out because it was going through so fast. Think about it, 2 gallons per minute. I could barely, it seemed like there was a lot that was being wasted because it was just globbing on there. And there's some adjustments that you can make to an airless paint sprayer. And I think it takes some time to kind of figure out what the adjustments have to be. Whereas with an HVLP sprayer, it's such a fine mist that you're really only accounting for, okay, do I want the mist to like be a wide spray pattern? Do I want it to be narrow? Like you have a lot of control over it. But with these airless paint sprayers, I think it probably used twice as much paint. And I don't know if I even knew how to properly control it. So I probably went through a lot more paint than what I needed to. But just keep in mind that this is something you're going to use for bigger projects. Now, you could actually use this for cabinets. Let's say that you have your 26 cabinets. That's a lot of cabinets. Lying in your yard, you've got tarps out there, and you have an airless paint sprayer. You could go ahead and use that for your cabinets. But if you're new in the market for a paint sprayer and you know that most of the projects that you're going to do is like furniture, maybe some cabinets, maybe your dining room table, I would say go with the HVLP because that's going to give you a lot more control and you can do bigger projects. But keep in mind that even if you do a bigger project with an HVLP paint sprayer, you might have to refill that cup lots of times. So, it might make more sense to do a bigger batch of paint, knowing that you're going to have to refill this container multiple times. And so that's what I did with my cabinets. When I was using that for the cabinet doors, I just created a larger batch of watered down primer so that when I ran out, I could easily just refill it. And I already knew that it had the right viscosity that it would need for the cabinet doors. So with the airless paint sprayer, you can have less control. And it's really all about speed. You're trying to get through that project quick. And if I had used the smaller HVLP paint sprayer on my fence, I don't think it would have worked very well. So keep that in mind. If you're somebody that does both types of projects, you might just want to get both. You're going to have different price points. The airless paint sprayers, the one that I have, I believe it's by Wagner. It's the Control Pro 130. And I will leave a link down below in the show notes if you want to click on those. It'll be my Amazon. Actually, no, not Amazon. It'll go to Home Depot. But the Wagner Control Pro 130, I want to say it was maybe about $250. But if you go with something like the HomeRite Finish Max Fine Finish Sprayer, you can get that for maybe $60, $70. And you can do a lot of small projects. But I've got both. I was thankful enough that companies had sent these to me so I didn't have to pay for them. And I've just had them for years. In fact, the one that I use for the cabinets, I had never even opened it. It was just sitting there in my garage. And I'm like, wait a minute, I've got this fine finish sprayer. Why don't I use this? And so it came in handy. I will tell you that it's much easier to clean out the HVLP sprayers. Cleaning is simple. I mean, remember I told you that you have this cup that's attached. All you've got to do is fill that with hot soapy water and then pull the trigger. And as soon as you notice that the water starts running clear, it's clean. You know that you've cleaned out the system. But it was a lot more difficult cleaning out the airless paint sprayer. I mean, it was a process. And I know that I've got it in the video. So if you're interested in seeing how that was cleaned, you can see it in the fence painting video. I'll leave that link down below. But it was just a little bit more involved. But again, different projects, different applications. If you had to buy one, it really depends on the project that you're doing. If you do multiple projects, then I would say get both. And again, with the air-assisted airless paint sprayer, the AAA, from what I've heard, it's like a combination of taking the HVLP because you can do low pressure with it, but then you can also, have speed with it. And so one website I thought their description was perfect. They said it's like combining the speed and power of an airless sprayer with the precision control of an HVLP. So, if you've got $800 to $5,000, get a AAA. But most of us, we're either going to stick with the airless or the HVLP. And I think that is totally fine for most of our applications. So those really are the things that you have to know about a paint sprayer. And it's not hard to do, to learn how to use. I have tutorials that I've done. I think I need to do a new tutorial because the one that I have previously done, it was like 5, 6, 7 years ago, and the quality of the video is not very good. So I will make a note to create a video so that you can see the difference between these two paint sprayers and get the complete tutorial. I know listening to it on a podcast, it's completely different, right? You need to actually see this in use. But that just gives you a good starting point. If you've been thinking about getting a paint sprayer, it can be kind of confusing to figure out which one you need. But yeah, I say go with the inexpensive HVLP. And later, if you want to do more bigger projects and you know that you're going to be doing fences and walls and maybe some siding, then yeah, definitely get the one that's a little bit more expensive. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed that podcast. I'm sorry again for not showing up. But yeah, life gets busy. Oh, to give you an update, my family has moved into the townhouse. So, I can tell you the stress, that stress that I was feeling over the last few weeks, it's starting to dissipate. And I feel bad for them because I know they still have a lot of things to sort. Moving is not an easy thing. I was talking to a friend who had said, I refuse to move anything. Like if I was leaving my home, I would just sell everything and just start fresh. And I have to agree with that. I would not want to pack up all this stuff in this house and have to figure out where everything's going to go. And, no, just sell it all. Do an estate sale. I will start over gladly. So yeah, they've gotten into the townhouse. Everything is going pretty well with them moved in there. And just a few last bit of things that have to take place. And I will tell you that when I visited them last week, my niece and nephew, well, this is my great niece and my great nephew. My great nephew is 2 years old. His little sister is a year old. And when I walked in and they threw their arms around me and wanted to hold my hand and pull me from room to room, we sat on the floor, we played around, they're giggling, they're laughing. And I'm walking around this place and I'm like, I am so thankful my family lives here. I'm so thankful that I got new carpet. Remember, I told you in the last episode that the previous tenant had a dog, 2 dogs, one of which should not have been there. And the dog peed everywhere. And for me to get new carpet, it was about $8,000, which I did not have. I'm still trying to figure out how I'm going to pay that off. And, but it was not a decision that I really had a choice in the matter. I had to make this choice. And I could have been like a slumlord and said, look, I'm only replacing one part of it. I don't care about the other part. I was so happy when I saw the looks on these little kids' faces rolling around on the floor and playing. And I thought, man, they're on fresh carpet. Like I was able to provide that for them. And this is where their home's going to be for the next 3-4 years, however long my nephew and his fiance and my mom stay there. But it felt good. It felt good seeing the happy children, my family running around the place. And, it absolved a lot of that stress of like, oh my gosh, do I get new carpet? I don't know. I'm going to pay for this. It was worth it when I saw them. It was worth it. Knowing that they're going to have a nice, clean place to live in, I felt good about that. So that's what I have for you this week. I cannot wait to find out how you have been. Send me an email. I do get emails from people sometimes, from listeners who are like, I love your podcast. Here's what I'm doing. So if you want to connect with me, I respond to all emails. You can email me, Serena@thriftdiving.com. Find me on Instagram @thriftdiving. Let's have a conversation. Send me some of your projects. If you have a question about a project or about a paint sprayer, I'm always here to answer your question. Thanks for tuning in. Come back next week. I think I'm going to talk about this 75 hard challenge that I've been doing. I'm on day 30 right now. So I've got 45 more days to go. And I'll explain a little bit more about the health, I don't want to say challenges, but the things that I've been doing to try to move my health in a better direction. I still love junk food. I really do, but I'm trying. And it's not easy during the holidays. I walk into Lowe's and they have chocolate covered peanut. Like, why do you have chocolate covered peanut butter things right there next to the paints? Because I'm going to want to pick it up. And I did twice. Caramels. Come on, guys. You're killing my 75 hard challenge. All right. With that, I will leave you and I will come back next week. I can't wait to talk to you next week. I will see you next episode.
Thrift diving. Find it ugly, make it pretty. Paint a power tools, alright. Saving money with those thrift store vibes.